Olivia Ding, a young player born in 2012. Her first chess tournament was in October of 2021, where after her first performance, she obtained a rating of 690. Ever since then, she's been competing at different tournaments, mainly in the Rocky Mountains area. She was able to reach her peak USCF rating of 1644 at the 33rd Annual North American Open in Nevada in January of 2024. But her diligence and perseverance will help her reach higher levels, and I wouldn't be surprised to see her obtain title after title. The game that I will show you is from the first round of the 2023 Idaho Open Championship in Pocatello, Idaho in May of 2023. As you may know, the first round in tournaments is usually a filter round that pairs the higher seeds versus the lower seeds. Her opponent, a player with 12 to 13 years of experience at rated tournaments and a peak rating of 2005, was ready to collect his first easy win at the tournament. Or so he thought. So in this game, Olivia Ding, with a rating of 1289, going against her opponent, a rating of 1962, and here her opponent has just the initials out of respect. The opponent had a peak rating of 2005, as I mentioned in the intro, and Olivia Ding has a peak rating of 1644, but at this time she hasn't reached her peak yet, right? So Olivia has the white pieces, and the first round, the filter round, we go ahead with what Olivia plays usually, and I had the opportunity to play against her as well. She's a very strong opponent, very strong player, and she has a bright future in chess, to be honest. Okay, so she's a d4 player. She likes to play d4, and that's what she did. So d4, let me make sure. Okay, d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, and then bishop b4, going into the Nimzo defense from the black pieces. And here we're just looking at the white perspective, of course. And this is very common, right? So usually, I guess you can like think of whenever people go d4, you can always have a response of d5 and then c4, and you have a Queen's Gambit decline. But at master level, you see a lot of chess masters actually play for this line of the Nimzo with a knight on f6. And then this line that we're seeing currently, it's very common. And here, if you were to go with a3, very common move, if they can actually capture here the knight with the bishop, and you would think, hey, you're just giving away your bishop. And usually we say, hey, don't try to trade your bishop for a knight, because bishops are usually stronger, you know, like longer scope, longer range. But in the Nimzo, it's very common to do this because you're capturing the knight, but in exchange, you're damaging the structure of the white pieces here, right? So at one point, maybe you can like also with like c5, and if they capture, you have like triple pawns here as the white pieces. You'll be able to target the weaknesses, capture these pawns, and at the end, for the end game, you have a 2-on-1 situation, you know, where you have an advantage with black. It's very nice to play with black here. So it's not a big deal just capturing the knight with the bishop here, because you get the extra damage structure, you know, not just like giving away the bishop for no reason. Okay, so here b6, very common move to just fianchetto your bishop, and then here goes the pin of the bishop onto the knight, kicks the bishop away, and here you don't want to just like trade. You're claiming that you have, yes, you have a damage structure, but now you're not just gonna give your bishop pair advantage. Okay, so very good move, just retreating h4. And then in the Nimzo, it is very common to go after this weakness. And it's sometimes a little bit tricky to defend it, right? Because at one point you have ideas of g5, and then your knight can also help into the attack, target some weak squares. Because here we're double pawns. And now this root pawn is very weak. You can target it easily, but then you have to get rid of this annoying pin, right? So here, e3 defending it with the bishop. Very good move. And now we have knight c5. Okay, knight c5. Here we have, just by Olivia, knight f3. And the idea here is with the next move from the opponent, knight a5. So moving the knight twice, but we're already putting a lot of pressure onto this pawn here. You know, the pawn on c4. Once it falls, that's good. You're claiming that you have an extra pawn. And it's a little bit tricky to defend this sometimes, right? But the good thing about this move here of knight f3 is that Olivia here, she goes ahead with the move d2 or knight d2, defending this pawn twice. Yes. Here the opponent goes with d5 right away, and Olivia goes for the capture. So here actually the engine likes to go for some ideas, computer ideas, where you kind of say, hey, you give away a pawn here. And then if they were to capture, you have an idea of knight e4, adding a lot of pressure onto this knight with a bunch of pieces here, claiming that you're going to win another pawn here in the end. And you cannot really do g5 because you can actually just capture this with check. If the king moves, now you just retreat the bishop and you win a piece, right? So that's the idea. So you cannot do that. You're adding a lot of pressure, and if the bishop retreats, it goes back to like pin your knight to your queen. Now you actually have this check. If they capture with the queen, you would have to capture with the bishop, and then the capture, and it just gets pretty messy from here, right? So attacking the rook, and then you retreat, and they retreat, and you're still playing chess. But now we have some extra weaknesses. Now there's an h pawn here that it's a little bit easy to target, maybe at 1 point, right? So you can always go with like moves like h4, bring your rook, and ideas like that. And this bishop is very strong right here. So these are some ideas in these lines. But let's see. Let's go back to what happened in the game. In the game, she actually went for the takes. And we're seeing, right, that the engine sometimes suggests certain things. And you would think, oh, how did I not see that? It's computer, right? So don't stress too much. Don't stress out too much whenever you don't find certain moves or things, because the engine is saying, oh, this is the best move in this position and you should like follow that. It's not like that. We're human, you know, so we're not perfect, and also our opponents are not perfect, right? So it's okay to have some human approach at certain times, and don't stress out too much about it. Okay, so they capture here. The bishop, and then you would think, what happens if I just capture with the king and the rook? Then you would lose your castle in privilege, your castle in rights, right? So here she decides to go and captures with a knight. Very good move. Here they capture back with the pawn, and then she retreats. She brings the knight back to defend these certain squares. And the idea is like she tries to bring the knight back to avoid having her opponent's knight go on c4, right? So that would be a very good outpost for the knight. Castles, and then rook e8. Rook e8, still dealing with this annoying pin. Very hard to deal with, actually. Something maybe that could probably potentially happen here. We probably like queen d6 to get rid of the pin, but then you don't even take the knight. You can actually just target the queen and always target at the c7 pawn, the weakness there, right? But then Olivia finds this great move, just putting more pressure onto the knight. And now the idea is like she wants to capture this knight. If nothing happens, she captures this knight. If they take with the queen, you ruin black's structure of pawns here, and then you would have islands here that you hopefully will be able to capture, to target easily, right? So her opponent goes with g5, just kicking the bishop out. And it's okay, you know, like there are not that many pieces on the board anymore. It's not too bad to damage the structure a little bit, like expand your pawns. It's just like the pin is very annoying to deal with. So here, her opponent goes with b5, already breaking everything. And keep in mind that her opponent is a stronger player. He will play risky chess. When you play risky chess, because you have more experience, you're a stronger player, you'll be able to play dynamic chess with tactics and things like that. And maybe your opponent, since they're weaker, you will be able to like capitalize on certain things or mistakes that your opponent would may make, right? So bishop e5, targeting the knight, you know, and you can always just like retreat the knight, move it somewhere, but then her opponent decided to just bring the rook up. And here she goes for e4, but here the engine is suggesting queen h3. Queen h3 with the idea of like if they move like the knight there, you can always capture, and you're always trying to target this weakness here, right? And then preventing the king from going there, preventing certain positions, but then just already like lashing here f4, and you can never push the pawn on f6 because then the rook will be hanging with check too. That's pretty brutal. So the idea here for the computer is like, okay, target the bishop, and then you just bring the queen up. And what happens if they do f6, kicking the bishop out? Now you actually have a big advantage with like queen g6, check, check, check again, and then you capture this pawn. And they cannot capture this with the pawn because the rook is hanging still, you know. So you just come in with a big attack. If they capture the knight there, you don't even capture the knight back yet. You give a check, you capture this pawn, and you don't even capture the knight back. That's the crazy part about it. I mean, you can always capture, but then you would lose your advantage. Right now, like white is totally winning with like plus 11 or something. It's crazy. You just give checks, and then another check, they lose the knight. But even you can capture the knight here, you know, with check and everything, you're totally fine. But here, if they find the move queen b7, targeting the rook, not even capturing the knight, but targeting the rook, if they were to move the rook to d8, now you have mate in 2 with like pawn f7 here, and then the king has no squares to escape. And then if they capture with the queen, now you just have a checkmate here at this point. So it is pretty crazy to like find all these things, all these lines. Okay, so that's just computer lines as I'm showing, and that didn't happen in the game. I wonder if like even like masters will be able to find those lines, probably, you know, but still, like even chess masters cannot find certain computer moves, right? So here Olivia's opponent went for c5, and then she goes for bishop e5, the rook defends again, and then she goes for e4, just trying to break the middle, right? Trying to go for some captures and things like that. And now the position is getting very spicy. Yes. So here her opponent goes with knight c6, attacking the bishop, just wants to get rid of all these pieces because Olivia has annoying potential here, but the bishop is very strong. If they get rid of the bishop, then Olivia's rest of her pieces are not so great. They're pretty passive, right? But here she goes for captures on d5. And her opponent goes obviously by taking the bishop there on e5. She captures back, and now there are 2 pieces hanging, right? So here an ideal move would be to just capture the pawn here on e5. That was when I saw this game, that was my initial thought. It's like, okay, just capture that and everything's fine. Right now, white has a slight advantage of like 0.3 or something, 0.4. It's not too bad. It's like the initial part of the game, you know, it's like a draw pretty much. And then here you can go with moves like c4, very human approach, you know, like defending. Even though here the computer likes knight c4 or something and then losing a pawn. It is crazy, but I think like the human approach would just be like to go for c4. And then you just keep playing chess, just everything's normal, not too bad, right? So that's what I would think right away. But then her opponent went with this move, knight takes d5. Knight takes d5 still has this annoying pawn here, but now the knight's also targeting certain things, and then like the knight has this jump here on f4, right? And then Olivia went with rook fe1, rook fe1, defending the pawn there in the middle, and then the knight comes in. Very annoying knight here, huh? Because then you have ideas of like bringing it here because the queen is defending here the d3 square. Yeah, so she brings the rook to d1, her other rook. Now everything's active, these pieces are nice, and here her opponent goes for rook c8. Rook c8, I would think is a pretty crucial mistake. Right now it's like the position in this position here, whenever she went with rook d1 or rook ad1, the position is with +1, so Olivia has an advantage. She's winning, but she has to prove it, right? And she's going against a stronger player, so +1 doesn't really matter, right? It's probably like still kind of like a draw, I would think, right? So here her opponent goes with like rook c8, and now the position was to like +2.4, 2.5 in like a lower depth, not like super high depth. And then she finds the move knight e4, having a discover attack onto the queen here, and then the knight has some nice squares to jump to. Her opponent goes with queen e7, and she finds this great move, knight f6 check. Knight f6 check, here the best approach would be for her opponent to just move the king to h8 or something, to not have any issues, right? But her opponent goes to g7 with the king. Now she finds this idea of rook d7. You would have to find like the move like queen f8, Going queen f8, now you find the move queen g4. And the idea is like the knight can never move. Imagine like the knight moves here to g6, right? Because like it wants to target the pawn or something. Now you can actually just capture this rook here. And it cannot be taken because the pawn is pinned to the king, right? And at one point, let's say you have ideas of this, and it's just very, very, very brutal, right? And then at the end, like the a pawn is hanging as well. And now if the queen moves somewhere, whatever, it cannot really move anywhere, right? This rook is always also being targeted. So the attack can be brutal, and here you cannot really, let's say you cannot really move the pawn here, and you cannot capture the rook because the knight is also defending the e6 square. So you gotta be careful there. You gotta like, you can try to like kick it out at one point maybe, or just bring your queen to, I think queen f5 is probably better at one point. Let's say something like this. And the idea is you have a checkmating one. They had to like defend it. They have to defend it somehow by taking the knight, you know, and then you can just capture with the pawn, and then you have some nice attacks here in this position, right? You can even capture with the queen probably too. With the pawn it's probably more accurate to like cover like the g7 square as well. So here, after this, her opponent went with rook takes e5. And probably, and this is what happens sometimes at tournaments. Sometimes our mind goes blank. And he was probably thinking that, oh, he can capture my, or she can capture my queen, but I have checkmate in one. You know? Maybe he didn't really process this about the rook defending the e1 square. So after this, she just took the queen, and he resigned. Right? And this is what happens. Sometimes our mind goes blank, and he was like, oh, I have checkmate in one. I can sacrifice my queen. He just forgot that the rook is still defending, right? So if they were to capture here, you just capture back with the rook, and you're fine. So in this position, I guess after capturing the queen, this position, her opponent, Olivia's opponent, resigned, and she was able to defeat an almost 2000 rated player, peak rating of 2005. But at the level of that she was at that point, it was like almost 1300. That's a huge upset, right? And she has a bright future. I think she has a lot of potential. She's a very strong player. Whenever I play against her, it's tough. It is very tough. And to be honest, I just wish her the best. She's an amazing person. I was able to ask permission to her parents to share this game of her, and I'm glad they agreed to it. And I'll share. Hopefully they get to see this game, this review, I guess. And check out the rest of the channel. Everyone, please check it out. We have good stuff. We have good videos, and hopefully it gets to grow more and more. And I hope you guys are enjoying the videos so far. We have the shorts, we have the longer videos, and we have more playlists coming up. And well, I hope to see you all in the next video. Thank you for watching.